Oh shit, here we go again.
Nintendo Switch and big open world games. That is a combination we see very rarely on the hybrid gaming system. When we do, it ranges from 10 out of 10 best game of all time to barely HD resolutions, frame rate issues and downgraded visuals. So what is the truth about open world games and especially the GTA Trilogy on Nintendo Switch? Throughout this video, we'll try to get to the source of it and whether things could change on a future Nintendo system. So be sure to leave a like, subscribe and press the notification bell and let's get into it. Ever since the reveal and first look trailer of the Nintendo Switch in October 2016, open world titles have been an important part of the marketing of the system. After all, which other system lets you play Skyrim, Zelda Breath of the Wild, Witcher 3, Assassin's Creed Black Flag, Immortals Phoenix Rising, Saints Row 4 and now GTA Trilogy Remaster on the go? The answer? None. Well, soon the Steam Deck, minus Zelda obviously. Being able to roam through big fantasy world, the Caribbean during the golden age of piracy, or the most frequented cities by foreign tourists in the US is a perfect formula for long drives, train rides, or most of all flights in real life. Now it can be argued that Rockstar cheated as they didn't put GTA 3, Vice City and San Andreas on a 32GB cartridge like CD Projekt Red did with The Witcher 3 and all its expansions plus DLC. But if space isn't an issue, then it is okay. Though for many it is an issue, and most of these games are 12GB or more digital, and in the case of the Grand Theft Auto Trilogy Definitive Edition, 3 separate downloads from the Nintendo eShop. And even in the physical release, you still have to do massive downloads. Thus, it is a little ironic that you can't buy, say, only San Andreas. No, you have to buy all 3 for $60, but download them separately. Dedicating 2.6GB for GTA 3, 5.3GB for GTA Vice City, and 11.9GB for GTA San Andreas, as they have to be downloaded separately, and despite being called a trilogy, are 3 completely separate experiences with no shared menus, usually found in collections like the Mario 3D All-Stars collection. With that being said, for $60 you get 3 remodeled and updated games, all in widescreen HD, and GTA 5 controls for some of the shooting and all of the driving. Speaking of GTA 5 on Switch, the open world title that everyone has wanted from Rockstar and which ran on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 back in 2013. Will it ever come to the Nintendo Switch? Obviously it depends on how well the GTA Trilogy does on the system, so be sure to buy it if you want to see GTA 5 on the Switch nearly 10 years after it came out on the PS3 and 360. But yes, the strength of the Switch has been an issue with open world titles, as even HD remasters of the GTA titles from the early 2000s are downgraded compared to the versions found on more powerful hardware. Lower resolution and frame rates is a given in these ports, and sometimes below 720p 30 frames per second is just a big sacrifice to make, as Skyrim, The Witcher 3 and Dying Light barely pulled through with the downgrade without sacrificing too much of the quality and detail of each title. The Switch is obviously a gameplay over technical performance system, but these downgrades are sadly also very costly for the developers of the original open world titles, as porting open world titles for a system that on paper is barely able to handle these big, ambitious last-gen open world games is experimental science, and nearly always involves high cost for limited success. The Witcher 3 was the extreme case, but even titles that are 10 years or older as of the upload of this video have turned out to be very difficult to bring over to the hybrid, as many open world titles simply run too poorly when played on Nintendo Switch in docked mode. Though there is one exception to this rule: Nintendo's own The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. But even this reinvention of the open world formula is locked to 900p resolutions and at best 30 frames per second. And in the case of frame rate, this one is known to drop well below that in tightly packed areas of the open world of Hyrule, notoriously Korok Forest. At the same time, when you buy the Switcher or GTA Trilogy, the Switch edition, you have to be aware that most of these non-Nintendo open world ports are not built to be enjoyed on a modern 40 inches or larger HD or 4K TV, but at most 7 inches OLED display whenever and wherever you please. Since we have to face the truth, without the handheld capability of the Switch, we would see even fewer or even none of the open world titles of the Switch, as there is no charm importing blurry, worse running titles that you can only play in low resolutions and low frame rates on a big screen. Just look at the Wii U and you will understand what we mean, since its undocked mode has brought Skyrim, Witcher 3 and now the GTA Trilogy to Nintendo Switch owners around the world, as without handheld play, none of these ports would have existed. Nintendo is painfully aware of this, and that they in reality have only 2 options in order to get open world titles support and in the future. Either make barely powerful enough hybrid systems, or make a TV-only system that is comparable in strength and structure to the PS5 and Xbox Series X. In other words, a 4K system that will directly compete with Sony and Microsoft. And there's your answer on what will most likely be the eventual successor of the Switch. Another more powerful hybrid which can handle last-gen open-world titles better than the Switch. As there is a reason why the Switch is the first Nintendo system to have 3D Grand Theft Auto titles, namely its priority as a portable. And this is no secret, as just look at what is important for Nintendo when coming with other models than the basic Switch. That being the Lite, which is only handheld, and the recent OLED, where all upgrades but bigger internal memory and LAN port applies exclusively to undocked play. But back to the ports themselves. In the case of Skyrim, Nintendo even stretched as far as to include Zelda Breath of the Wild Link's main tunic, Master Sword and Hylian Shield, which shows how important this open-world hybrid port was to Nintendo. It was a port meant to prove to other developers that the Switch can run most open-world titles, both on the go and on your TV, and that Nintendo is more than willing to work with developers like Bethesda, CD Projekt Red or Rockstar to turn these miracle ports into reality. It is just that at the end of the day, none of these open world ports will sell close to any of Nintendo's own games. Not even a tiny fraction of Breath of the Wild's 25 million sold copies on the system. No matter how great the story, gameplay and soundtracks are, which we saw with especially The Witcher 3 and now the 3 GTA classics. And each of these games is unique for its own. But at the same time, Vice City truly stands out as it will want you to get back to the 80s even though you were born after 1989. While San Andreas still boasts the most diverse GTA open world and story to date. A gigantic interstate quest with 3 giant hubs: Los Santos, real-life Los Angeles, San Fierro, real-life San Francisco, and Las Venturas, real-life Las Vegas. CJ, here we go again, Big Smoke and his legendary fast food order, and the corrupt Officer Tenpenny played by none other than Samuel L. Jackson. Sadly, with a new generation of consoles and thus games, it is less and less likely that we'll see many more open-world titles from the biggest developers ported to the Switch, unless it is for collections like the one for the PlayStation 2 era GTA games, or a miracle GTA 5 port thanks to the good sales of the GTA Trilogy on the Switch. For now, outside of Breath of the Wild 2, the very popular free-to-play Breath of the Wild like Genshin Impact is the only open-world title that has been promised to come to the Nintendo Switch, and that is great. But at the same time, over a year has passed since the release of the game on all other platforms. And that is quite concerning for the Switch version, as we have heard little to nothing about the Switch port for what will no doubt become the biggest free game on the Nintendo Switch as soon as it arrives, and definitely the biggest free open-world title on the system. Sadly though, the reality now is that we have a question if it will arrive before or after the last new fully open-world Zelda title on the Nintendo Switch sometime in 2022. After all, it should be possible to bring this port over since Genshin Impact is even on smartphones, much like the original non-remastered upscale versions of the GTA Trilogy. And it says a lot about the struggles and problems about getting open world games to run properly on the Nintendo Switch. Since you have to sacrifice resolutions at 1080p, since there's no way to run those games at those resolutions on the Nintendo Switch, along with frame rate above 30 frames per second. And those are just one of many hurdles for open world titles to shine on the Nintendo Switch, both when it comes to undocked and docked play sessions. Porting plus cartridge costs plus lack of high enough sales to support these are others which we have been facing since 2017 and will continue to deal with to the end of the Nintendo Switch's lifecycle. At the end of the day, the number of open world titles on this system depends on the sales of past and present open world titles. No doubt the massive success of open world Zelda did miracles both for the genre and Nintendo Switch ports of big open world titles. Also that we have other open world experiences to play before and after the release of the next open world Zelda to the end of the Nintendo Switch lifecycle. Then we'll see if the next Nintendo system will be able to play all major open world titles in 1080p Full HD or higher resolutions and with a frame rate above 30 frames per second. That should be the target in a video game industry which has embraced open world games as the new gold standard for the biggest and most ambitious experiences. The golden decade for open world games in general and on the Nintendo Switch. Let's hope the 2020s will be able to surpass it after we started off with Immortals Phoenix Rising from Ubisoft in 2020 and more from 2022, since 2021 until GTA has been rather slow on the open world front. With that being said, quality has been the standard for open world titles so far on the Nintendo Switch, as most of the ports have consisted of Game of the Year recipients such as Skyrim, The Witcher 3, Breath of the Wild, and now Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. And that is the truth of the GTA Trilogy and open world titles on the Nintendo Switch. Do you agree with my opinion on the matter about hardware, costs and developer-publisher risk, or do you think there's more to this matter than what we are able to sum up over 10 minutes or so? Sound off in the comment section down below. If you haven't already, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to Commonwealth Realm, and press the notification bell and again for all notifications to not miss any upcoming Nintendo Switch videos. Finally, a big thanks as always goes to all our patreon.com/commonrealm patrons, and in particular to roller producer Charles Shush, and please enjoy one or both of these two awesome videos.